Well, welcome back to the podcast. Today we have Lec. So thank you so much for coming on to talk to us all about the importance of movement in the early years and how we can support our kids to develop through their movement and to move more. So before we begin, I'd love to hear from you. What is something that you've done today to prioritize your own well-being and take care of yourself?
Oh, good question. I parked at the bottom of the hill. We live on a big property, and I parked down the bottom and then I walked back up. That felt good. Got my heart pumping, and it was just beautiful being outside.
Yeah, that sounds lovely. I love that. So can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into exercise physiology and what it is that you do now?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Lec, and I'm based in Karamba, which is near Coffs Harbour in New South Wales, Australia. I started out, I've always really loved being physically active and just moving my body. I've sort of been part of a range of sports and activities, everything from sort of ballet as a 5-year-old, gymnastics, team sports, and then my sort of big love in athletics and also then horses. I rode horses for a long time, both in Australia and in Europe. And when I sort of after finishing school, I didn't quite get into vet, which had been the sort of main aim. And I was a bit stuck about what I wanted to do. So I took a year off and I went and I started coaching. So did my sort of coaching qualifications around horse riding. And I had that year of sort of feeling what it would be like to ride professionally. And it didn't really feel like it was sort of stimulating enough for my mind. So when I came home after that, I thought, what am I going to do? I was interested in human behavior. I mean, it's hard not to be. And so I thought maybe I'll start a psychology degree, which is offered at our local university. And maybe from there I'll go into sports psychology. So I did my undergrad in psychology and sort of had intentions of going on to do my honours and then masters to become a clinical psych. But, life sort of gets in the way, and it was a bit of a roller coaster. So I didn't go on, I got into my honours program, but didn't go on to do that, and worked for a little while before going to ride in Germany. So that was in 2011, the year before the London Olympics. And then when I came home from that, I again was sort of in that place of what am I going to do? My mum's a nurse and she'd been working in Aboriginal health around the Coffs area. And she said, I think diabetes education isn't done very well at the moment. Is that something that you're interested in? And I thought, well, actually, really key ways for managing diabetes are diet, which I'm really interested in, and exercise, which I love. So what a happy amalgamation. And I'd done a lot of the undergrad units from exercise science as part of my psych degree because you get a lot of electives. So I thought, well, actually, the fastest way for me to become a diabetes educator is to become an exercise physiologist. So I did the units that I needed to get into the master's program to do my master's in exercise physiology. And then I became an exercise physiologist. I was working in private practice for a while around the area here, and then decided a job came up in the Northern Territory where I would live in Darwin but travel all over the Northern Territory to remote Aboriginal communities, helping to manage chronic disease. And so I did that, just sort of incredible lifestyle, flying to work, having my own private pilot and plane usually. It was very sort of involving work, like very high energy, sort of, you really had to be living it. And I was studying at the same time, doing my diabetes education qualifications. So that was a really amazing time, doing all of that. And then I ended up working for an Aboriginal medical service and living on a very remote island. I was actually booked in to have my little boy in Nhulunbuy, which is sort of a township in Northeast Arnhem Land. And the medical service that I worked for managed that whole Northeast Arnhem district. I came home to Coffs on Christmas holidays and My membranes ruptured at 30 weeks. So it was sort of this then cascade of intervention. I ended up in a tertiary institution here, like a hospital. And my little boy's now really well, but I had him at 32 weeks. And he showed a lot of signs of sub 28 week prems. So sort of this extreme prems, and we needed a lot of follow-up. So we had a lot of early intervention, and incredibly, we had an amazing team here in Coffs, really great GPs and pediatricians, as well as then all the allied health services that we needed some additional support with. We've got an incredible pediatric physio here, as well as speeches and OTs and dietitians who we needed a bit of help from. So I guess all of that really cemented to me that early intervention is just so critical, and this very precious time when our kids are tiny and growing, but, as they will remind us, that, it's just such an important time for things to be getting on the correct pathway, or, not that there's a right and a wrong way, but heading in the sort of in a good direction for their development, for their lives. And I guess I've always been really passionate about, longevity and exercising for life, like not for the way it might make you look or feel even necessarily, but just that you want to be healthy. And I think really promoting that to kids is, just a really important line of work. And that's why I am where I am now.
And that's what you're doing now in your work. You've shifted it and you're working more in that early intervention with children. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. I sort of have a day job where I am promoting health to a lot of corporates, and speaking around different well-being sort of topics. But then, certainly my passion project is working with kids and families. When I was sort of putting things together, I was thinking, should I be peds and parents? Because obviously it's sort of the coupling of the two, but pediatrics is sort of my focus. And then I guess everyone that becomes part of that team.
Yeah, often those go hand in hand, right? You can have one as your focus, but then whether it's kids or the parents, but you end up integrating the other stuff in, or that's what I find in my work.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess then speaking to the other part of your question about what exercise physiology really is, because it can be a bit of a mouthful, B, a bit of an unknown to a lot of people. We, much like GPs might promote a particular therapeutic approach to a health condition, we prescribe exercise. So whether it's, for any sort of musculoskeletal condition or anything sort of respiratory, might be to do with how people's hearts are functioning, as well as sort of any developmental stuff. Also throughout our lives, we can develop conditions like cancer or even diabetes, and then things like Parkinson's and Alzheimer's. There's a whole sort of gamut of things that we deal with, and often people will have sort of like a bit of a coupling of a few things. So working together to find the right exercise for people to be promoting their sort of best health and managing any health conditions that they have going on.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think that is really good to clarify, because it is often an unknown. We know it has to do with physical activity, but people don't know too much more about it than that. So thanks for letting us know. So when we think about babies, let's start there. There's so much stuff out there to support babies to hit their milestones faster, to stand earlier, all those things. And it seems like in our society, we celebrate like walking and talking really early. And some parents feel pressured to have their kids meet these milestones really early and keep up. What are your thoughts on this and all the stuff that out there that is marketed to us to quote unquote help our kids develop physically?
Yeah, it's a really great question. And I guess, it's a marketer's dream, right? Like sort of vulnerable parents who want the best for their kids. But I guess that, it's when we think about milestones, I think we often think about these physical ones. When do they roll over? When do they sit? When do they crawl? When do they stand? When do they walk? But actually there are milestones around everything. Like there are social and emotional milestones, there are sort of speech and language ones, cognitive, and then there are physical milestones as well. The key really with milestones is that things keep tracking forwards. with my little boy in particular, this was really obvious to me. He was like very sort of floppy for a long time. And it took, I had never really had much to do with prems before. And it just sort of again, first time mum, I didn't even really register that it wasn't that normal, or what we might say is sort of typical development. But in time, everything just sort of came together. And the key really with Milestones is that things are rolling in the right direction. It's like a trek, maybe uphill. You've got to sort of get to each benchmark, and you've got sort of all these little seats along the way. It doesn't usually matter, is the sort of thought, if they skip one milestone. If they skip two, it becomes a bit more of like a concern. But the general sort of old adage of you need to crawl before you can walk, or you need to walk before you can run, does to some extent hold true. And the key really is that you just want to let your kids be, and you just want to let them move. I think part of this, when you think about, well, what do your kids just naturally do? Like if we get out of the way, if we're not around, what do they do? And generally, they will never sit still or be still. They will be doing things. So from the first moment that they come out, babies when they're born can crawl up onto their mother's chests. We know that. And from there, they just start moving and exploring more. This whole wide world is just a big sort of curious, new thing to them, and their bodies are new to them too. So they need to learn how to use them, whether it's kicking out or rolling over, and then starting to get up and, explore more. But it is just one of those things that's good for them to go steady. And I guess the one time that I'll really sort of speak up to parents is to encourage them to do some reading if they want to use something like a container, or a jolly jumper, or any of the things where kids are held in a position that they're not yet capable of holding themselves in. Even the seated sort of molded seats, the idea and the thinking around kids' development is that we shouldn't put them into positions until they can get to that position themselves. So once your child is able to sit, then it's not such a big deal to put them into something where they are sitting, but or seated. But prior to that, they're not yet capable of sort of being in that position yet. And much like even standing them on your lap, there are some kids really love that. And certainly if you're holding them and they push themselves up to standing, then that's wonderful. But doing it for them is different. And that's where then a lot of the container type things, the play activities and those things, they hold them in one position for a long time. And it's not usually a position that they're able to be in at that point themselves.
And is that straining on their bodies because they're not able to hold the correct posture and their back and their neck up or their head up? And all, is it because of those sort of things that it's just because they're not developmentally at that phase, it's hard on them, or what's the reason behind it?
Yeah, so a few different things, I guess. Like if we think from their feet up, so usually those centers don't have them in a position where their feet are flat. Usually they're up on their toes, and then that predisposes them to reaching with their toes. So then their calf muscles become a little bit recoiled almost and a bit tighter, like they're up. So then it's easier for them to be on their toes than to have their foot flat on the ground. So then they need to stretch those muscles, otherwise they're toe walking. Another really big one with things like jolly jumpers and those sorts of containers is that their hips aren't ready to take load at that point. And so it's predisposes them to hip dysplasia. And particularly if they've already sort of at that point, it's something that's become much more prominent, interestingly, with sort of more modern nappies. And I haven't found research articles to support this, but anecdotally, this is certainly true that the old cloth nappies that we used to use really held babies' hips out because they were wide and that in that sort of frog leg position. Now, the modern nappies are much narrower, so the kids aren't held out in that position. That you've probably seen the hip dysplasia harnesses that kids are sometimes put into if they have an issue, and that's really the position that kids were in the old style nappies. So I mean, genetically, like obviously things like C-sections are passing on heritable traits to leading to different different physical traits being passed on that might otherwise not have been. But it's just interesting when you look at some of that stuff. But basically, until you're able to hold your head up or sit up yourself, your joints in your body, and like you say, your spine, and your neck, they're not sort of strong enough to be holding your head or supporting your body in a way that is appropriate at that age.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So can we just go back to something you said there to clarify? What is it about C-sections that's having an effect on genetic or heritable issues?
Just in terms of like with some, so when women are birthing vaginally, the sort of the traits that are being passed on, I guess it goes back right back to childbirth, in terms of like the number of women who now die in childbirth is obviously dramatically reduced, but the one of the sort of reasons that people may not have been able to reproduce or to birth a child and therefore pass on those heritable characteristics over, I'm talking like a long time, wasn't passed on several hundred years ago, but now they are through other birthing techniques.
I see. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So when you're talking about how we want our kids to be improving with their development, and that seems okay. And if they're missing a couple of the milestones, like one here or there, that's likely not a big deal. What do you think about if kids don't crawl and they scoot instead? Is that a concern? Should we be trying to make sure that they crawl and help them have more tummy time, or is that okay? And everybody generally ends up walking and running anyways. What's your take on that?
Crawling is like this sort of amazing time in all of our lives where our brains are sort of like constantly doing fireworks. Like it just opens up this whole world of exploration in a different way. And there are lots of sort of cross-body, obviously it's a cross-body sort of movement pattern, but the way your brain then needs to work, it's sort of constantly firing from both hemispheres. And so it's setting up all these neural pathways that are then, open for exploration and for strengthening down the track. So crawling, the sort of thoughts around crawling are that it really needs to happen at some point. Some kids actually walk and then go back to crawling. And it's not something that we should hurry them through. Crawling should be thought of as like this sort of pinnacle of like, it's an amazing time in all of our development, and should just be encouraged wherever possible. I remember crawling around like to the point where I had sort of raw knees because I was encouraging crawling, and it can be on a variety of surfaces. That sometimes they stand up, maybe take a step and then go back to it. It doesn't matter, but just, it's an incredible sort of time. And I understand that parents are sort of eager for their kids to be doing all these things, but they do have their whole lives. And so this sort of notion of just going step by step, literally, or crawl by crawl is really important.
And what are some things that we can do as parents to support our kids to crawl? Is it like you say, just crawling and crawling with them and modeling that? Is that the best thing for us to do?
Yeah, absolutely. There are so many like incredible sort of baby-led, I guess, just watching them, and looking at what they're interested in and looking around and sort of just finding the things that they're looking for, but making sure that everything is down on the floor. And that means you being down on the floor too. So, down on your tummy. If you are then able to push up, it's sort of a little bit like a lot of Pilates type movements. You see them and they push up almost into a plank, and then they're back down, and then they maybe, poke their bum out, and they do all these different things. And so replicating that stuff and doing it along with them is really important. They see you doing it, and then they're watching it, and they just are learning the whole time about how, how to get around, and all the time strengthening themselves too.
Yeah. And you're talking about how crawling it gets like your brain firing in all these incredible ways and having that cross body, cross brain connection. I think that is such a key part of crawling. How else does movement in general affect brain development? Because it's huge, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And look, like a lot of the research that is out there, I guess, looks at the adult brain, and we know that kids aren't mini adults. They, kids are kids, and we need to treat them and think of them as kids, like a separate sort of being to an adult. But in the adult brain, we know that there are certain types of activity that really stimulate different parts of your brain. Certain areas release, like engaging in certain types of activity. So aerobic exercise, the sort of like going for a walk or going for a steady run, it really prompts the production of BDNF, brain-derived neurotropic factor. And it's this sort of, again, like a wonderfall sort of chemical that your brain produces that really supports your memory. This is why I tell people I have a great memory, because I do a lot of aerobic exercise, just, for fun, not for any reason. That's just the way I live my life. But I did start wondering about it the other day. I thought, I wonder if that really is why I do have a good memory. But, different types of activity, things like yoga, they've actually done comparative studies on two brains in terms of like one person who, as a 75-year-old, had always done yoga, and the brain image looked like that of a 25-year-old, the sort of the normal age-related cognitive decline that we often see wasn't there. And the brain, like, functionally still looked so sort of supple, if you like. And much like the physical body, you can sort of picture, how it works. We know as well that things like sports drills, so where you're concentrating on sort of replicating a specific task. So you're using your prefrontal cortex to sort of control your behavior, as well as sort of then your basal ganglia, like working on what you're actually doing. It's really good for attention. So this is one that people might like to try at home if your kids like aren't able to stay focused on their homework or reading a book or whatever. Getting outside and just have a quick run around, kick the ball to them a few times, or call for the ball, and encourage them to call for the ball, brings them back into really being able to focus their attention, sort of really, a magic sort of way. Like, it's instant that this stuff happens. And that's one of the things that I really love about all of this. I guess I first really started getting excited about the effect that you can have on a neurological level when I was working with patients who had Parkinson's. And then also when I was working in communities, I noticed a lot of people who had type 2 diabetes, but it had been relatively uncontrolled, were developing Alzheimer's and dementia sort of symptoms at a really early age, sort of like in their late 30s and 40s. And I then employed some of the sort of same types of exercise, so quite high intensity things, or doing two things at once. So something physical and a cognitive task, like, who are all the presidents, or how many tell me all the prime ministers, or what are these girls, tell me about bush foods or girls' names, or whatever it was, while they were shadow punching or throwing a ball to me or on a bike or something. And, you see people's moods and just their whole sort of, like, everything just lights up. It's sort of like their brain switching on. And I guess that's what we now know is replicated in a sort of functional MRI. When you see that stuff happening, you literally see everything start switching on. I find that stuff really exciting, obviously.
Yeah, no, that is incredible. And it's amazing. Exercises, we often think it's for our physical body or to lose weight or be strong, but there's so much more to it. And it does have a huge impact on our brain, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And a whole heap of things. Like, I often tell people who are maybe struggling with something like weight, or, exercising, sure, can help you lose weight, but it can also be an appetite suppressant. There have been these amazing studies done where they had 3 groups of people come in on exercise bikes. One group was doing high intensity intervals. One was just going for a sort of moderate, steady state, continuous activity. And then the others just rested. And then looking at how much, like, post-workout porridge these people consumed, and the people who had done the high intensity consumed less immediately after, but also the next day. So it again is showing that things like, the stimulation of ghrelin, the hormone that controls your hunger, and appetite, it's all so linked. I just find it fascinating.
So with children, should we be helping to support them to get all sorts of movement and just regularly move throughout the day, and also get that high intensity exercise? Like give them opportunities to run and swim and do all those things as well. They're both important. Is that right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And so different types of activity are important for different reasons. We know that the sort of rough and tumble, literally where you're jumping and maybe having a small collision with something, or falling over, not to the point of fracturing things, but falling over and there being some sort of concussive force, that all really works to strengthen your bones and your muscles. Equally, we know that the sort of continuous exercise to be able to have stamina is really important for developing just your general sort of fitness and musculature. So the guidelines, and I did a little bit of just clarifying, but Canada was actually one of the first countries that took to kids having like the guideline looking at a 24-hour period. And so the current guidelines in Australia are that kids should be active, like in active play for at least 3 hours a day. And we actually borrowed these from Canada. So I guess I should clarify that 0 to 12 months old, so that's sort of newborn, the aim is that people are doing 30 minutes, like kids are doing 30 minutes of tummy time. And maybe if it's not all at one time, it's broken up across the day, and that they're allowed to kick and, be active as they want to. From once they're sort of toddlers, so they're sort of 1 to 2 years, we're looking at 3 hours of play per day. That's sort of active play with the vigorous play thrown in there. So there are sort of these opportunities for energetic play. For 3 to 5 year olds, so sort of more that preschool age, the idea is that there are the 3 hours again, but at least one of those hours is at a higher intensity. So sort of what you were saying, that sort of more moderate to vigorous activity. And for kids, this is every day. So it's sort of like there's no, let's just have a rest. They actually really need to do it, and they need to be getting it out. Once kids are sort of at school, the recommendation in Australia for 5 to 17-year-olds is that they're having at least 60 minutes of activity a day, with then some sort of opportunities like 3 times a week that they're doing the type of exercise that would strengthen their muscles and bones. So it's at a higher intensity. The key part of this, I think, really is that Australia borrowed it from Canada, but that we really are looking at the sedentary time. And most of that for our kids is screen time. So the recommendations are very clear that kids under 2 should have absolutely no screen time. Part of that is like a cognitive development thing, but also we just don't want them to be still. So they need to have the opportunity to move. And it goes back to what I said before, like if we get out of the way, they're just constantly on the go. If you had a time lapse on a kid for a day or a step count, it's actually something I really want to do. It would just be like this blur, and they would be all over the place, constantly moving. And they will have spurts of being much more intense and then spurts of sitting. But even when you watch them playing Lego, like the sort of agility in their hips, I often think, gosh, when do you stop doing that? At what point is it that you stop and become more sedentary and sort of more stationary in your life? The other really important part of the guidelines, I think, is around sleep. And I find those really interesting to look at, because there's the recommended amount and there's a variation. In most things there's a variation, but sleep as well, there's the sort of recommended window, and then again, what might be considered normal, and outside of that, sort of less than that or more than that being not recommended. But I would definitely encourage people to check that out, and it's worthwhile sort of having it printed, in your office or in your on your fridge or something, just so you can reflect on it regularly about how things are going.
Yeah. And with that, like, what can we do as parents to create an environment that makes it conducive for our kids to move freely and to develop at their own rate and move and move and move, because so much of our society seems to be focused on our kids being little adults. And like you say, they aren't, but it seems like there's an expectation that if you go to a cafe, they sit, and at school they sit so much of the day. And yeah, we're training all that movement out of them, and it just doesn't seem like a good thing to do at all, and not natural. So how can we get out of their way, like you talk about, and just let them move how they want to move? What are some tips that are doable in the way our society is set up?
Yeah, I think like that's such a sort of interesting and broad question. Partly because, so some of it, one of the things I was interested in when I did my psych degree was environmental psychology. So how do we create environments where movement, that are conducive to movement? And some of that comes down to like urban design or house design even. And we know that open plan houses and getting furniture sort of, a lot of that practical stuff you can have set up yourself, so that or you can alter yourself to make it more conducive for physical activity to be possible. I'm sitting in the middle of the bush right now. Like it's I look out and there are trees everywhere, and I understand that I'm probably the huge minority here. So for me personally, we can sort of just get outside, and probably in Australia it's much, the climate is much more conducive to be able to do that at any point or wherever you live, and parks and all of that sort of stuff is possible. I think if you're in a place where that's not so possible, having spaces in your home that you can make sort of moving spaces. We have a corridor and we play relays up and down the corridor. We've just recently had a whole lot of rain. So, inside play has been what we've been needing to do. You don't need much room for a toddler to jump. What it probably involves, though, is you getting involved too. So from a mum's point of view, you need to make sure that your pelvic floor is in, a good enough shape to jump. And jumping is one of those exercises. It gives you really good feedback. Like the kids love it, or stamping, because you get the response from the floor. Like that you're doing it. It gets a bit noisy, but we, just sometimes you need some big movements to get that energy out. We sort of recently gotten into doing Tabata type exercise, which is like an interval. I used to do it and I loved it, and I just had gotten out of the habit. But I have this Tabata timer where I do 20 seconds of work, 10 seconds of rest, and it's a countdown. And so I just have the countdown playing, and my 3-year-old's been getting in and doing that with me. And so he's like, calls out when it's work time, when it's rest time. And I think some of those messages are also really beautiful in terms of just it being time for work or it being time for rest. But now he's getting in and doing exercises like jump squats and burpees. And the technique, I think, for kids is less important than it might be for adults when you maybe have like joint stuff going on yourself, or sort of restrictions, I suppose, on yourself. But we know that just getting moving, like you demonstrating stuff, is so key, and trying to be creative where you can. Sort of don't be afraid of being a bit of a fool. Certainly don't be afraid of getting dirty, crawling around on the ground, even if you're like a bear. So you're on your feet and on your hands, and you can do that on roads or in parks. Certainly you can do it inside, you can do it upstairs. I don't know that I'd recommend doing it downstairs, but backwards, maybe downstairs. Just looking for opportunities, I think, wherever you can. Playing hide and seek, playing tips, trying to make everything a game, jumping in puddles, having creative stories. And there are books now that exist, that are yoga type stories. And so you can just start at that point. You can really turn any book into a physically active adventure as well.
Yeah, I find half the time when we're reading stories, my kids are jumping on the bed anyways, and they're there listening, but it's hard for them to sit still and listen. There's moments where they do that, but it's kind of half and half. And I think it's a really good way for them to just release that energy before they fall asleep.
Yeah, I agree.
So for parents who have kids who would rather just sit and do crafts and read books all day and generally want to be inside, I think you just provided some really good suggestions for those parents to take on board. And the biggest thing that stood out to me there was just that modeling of us doing it. And then the kids, they're gonna want to join in if we're doing something silly or fun or movement, right? Are there any other suggestions that you have for parents who have those kids that just don't want to move much?
Yeah, I think the key here, and it maybe it's good if we think about something like food, the thoughts now are like, just keep offering it. So like broccoli, my little boy doesn't usually eat broccoli, but I just keep putting it on his plate. And last night he played with it a bit, like he mashed it into his potato, and thought that was great. I was like excited, even though I still got to eat the broccoli. But the matter that I think what matters is you keep putting it out there. And I think the other thing that's really important is that you yourself, when you're modeling, you talk about how it makes you feel. And, certainly if it gives you sore muscles, I reflect back on that, like, oh, I must have done some really hard work, or I hadn't used those muscles in a little while and they're feeling the strain. But usually I try and reflect on things like, wow, now my body feels so fresh, or it feels really alive. Having some of that really immediate reflection is really important for kids. I don't want to make out like I'm the sort of perfect parent at getting my little boy involved in exercise. Sometimes I really want to do something. He really wants a cuddle. And, you have that sort of slightly terse exchange of like, well, who's going to sort of win here? And certainly I've, well known for doing exercises, holding him or with him on my back. But equally, sometimes you've just got to keep showing up for yourself. And sometimes we have a bit of a standoff of like, well, no, I really need to do this for me, and it makes me feel good. And they pick up that messaging as well. I think with the kids who really are not wanting to get involved, look for tiny opportunities first. If they're into something like craft, maybe you can go outside and explore, or like find a leaf that you then rub a pencil over to make a leaf drawing. Look for opportunities to get outside and explore, to collect some things for your craft. I think for kids who are into books, again, you can sort of have think about that, we're going on a bear hunt. You can make a whole sort of day's walk out of that. Oh, look, like here we are at, the reeds, or here we are at the walk, here we are at the water, here we are at the mud. There's a whole sort of range of different things. I think the really key thing that we need to keep out as much as we can, keep out of our kids' lives, is screen time. And again, there are opportunities for kids to get active in front of screens, whether it's some of the sort of dancing related things or doing yoga or whatever it is. I guess I just encourage people to think, well, yeah, you could do that, but you could be the person that's being on the video. You can be the person that puts on the silly music to dance around to as well. And they they have a sort of different experience from that. I understand it's tricky. And I know that for a lot of people, screens, are a big part of what they do with their kids. And I don't at all want to come across it being critical. I just want people to sort of think, hang on, I could do that differently. And yeah, I guess that's the sort of key. Is that some helpful advice? Or I'm just sort of trying to think of, is there more? What else can we do? I guess being involved in team sports, getting out, have a family day out, go for a walk, or park just a little bit. I know it sounds corny and people probably know this stuff, but literally park around the corner or 1 block away. So you just have to walk that little bit and have an adventure on the way. What are all the little things that you can notice? Are there paw prints that an animal's left behind? Can you see something flowering? Here at the moment it's autumn, and so the trees are all losing their leaves. We've been looking for rainbow leaves a lot lately. And the trees who are, taking off their leaf clothes. I love sort of quirky words. One's like Scythurism, the noise that the wind makes in leaves. So I get Gus to listen as well. I'm like, well, what can you hear? He's like, Mom, I can hear the Scythurism. I'm like, wow. Or use their other senses. What can you smell? Another great word is petrichor. So the smell that the rain leaves behind. if you smell that stuff, or what can you feel? The apricity, like the warmth of the sun on your back. Anyway, just sort of different ideas around other sensory factors that you can draw in that can spark them up, just get them feeling alive about it. But I think key is treating it as play as much as you can anyway.
Yeah, well, that was incredible. That was so many different suggestions there. And I have a couple of these books. I think they're called Your Wild, I can't remember what it was, Your Wild Books or something, but it's a series and they're all about using leaves and things that you find on nature walks to make crafts. So that I'll put that in the show notes because I think that's an incredible resource for those people to use. And it goes very well in line with your suggestions there.
Yeah, I'll send you some other book titles that I found really great that, I do have a bookworm, but they're really good fun.
Yeah, that would be great. Yeah, I know you've got a lot of really good ones for yoga and Pilates and how to get your kids involved in that. So that would be amazing. So let's talk about moms here for a moment. What are the best exercises and movements for mothers to do postnatally and in those early years of motherhood so they stay strong and they have a good pelvic floor that's working well and so they can keep up with their kids? Is there anything really key that we should be doing?
Well, I think, that's all a huge priority, I think, for most parents. And it doesn't necessarily come easily. I think one of the, very early things that everyone should do is to get a pelvic floor check with a women's health physio. And if you haven't had one, you can have them from sort of 6 weeks post-birth. If you haven't had one, go now, even if it's a couple of years or 10 years since you had your child. But just go now, just get one. And then where you're starting from. Because if there are, if there's anything going on, they'll be able to give you some exercises to get that side of things sorted. Because we know now that at least 6 months postpartum, women shouldn't be running. Just that, it's a bit like a muscle injury, if you like. You need time to recover. Like birth is a major sort of stress on your body, and it's a major thing that you go through. So the impact of that, we now know, and it's well researched, that you shouldn't run for 6 months. So I still remember the sort of 6-month date. I was like, right, I can run into the water now. We'd gone to the beach. I was like, woohoo, I can run in. I had a little, probably slight Baywatch moment of running into the water. From there on, really, I think like whatever and wherever and whenever you can get active is important. Everybody's life, everybody's body, everybody's circumstances are going to be slightly different. Talking about myself, like I have this sort of ongoing back injury from riding that I need to sort of be on top of all the time. So really, it just means that I always need to be physically active. So I, chose the right job, obviously. But I love Pilates for strengthening my body, from sort of maintaining my core strength to keep my back feeling really happy and healthy, as well as just generally keeping my body feeling great. Some of you may know this, some of you may not. Claire and I have recently caught up at a ballet class. I love doing that sort of thing. Like I love dancing. Unfortunately, I don't get, the sort of big nights out to head or hit the dance floor. So, that's a once a month class that I get to, and no, I don't fit much in between, but I think about it a lot. I love walking, and I do a lot of walking as a mode of transport. So wherever I can, I walk instead of driving. I live half an hour out of our major town. So, it's not possible to just walk into town. But when I'm in town, I walk around as much as I can. And I'm always the one that gets tagged in those, like, you have one friend that always says, let's walk. But I do, I do love that. So my inclination, if I'm early for an appointment, or if I find out my doctor's running, late for an appointment, whatever, I won't sit down and sort of check emails or scroll. I'll go for a walk. And I really like calling people when I'm walking, or listening to podcasts. So, I often try and use that time where I might get something like that in. I don't run very frequently, but I think that's a great way for people to sort of get things in. I think the key really when you're a mum though, it becomes having these sort of, you have a lot of 5-minute sort of time slots, but you don't have like an hour to go for a run usually. So I think being active and finding exercise snacks where you can, be it like 30 seconds of push-ups or 10 squats, or sometimes you can have a circuit of like a leg-based exercise, something like a squat, or sitting down on a chair and standing back up with a wall push-up, and alternating those for as long as you can, as long as your little one will allow, then you've done something for yourself. I certainly think that mindful activities are really beautiful. So things like yoga and Pilates that have that mindfulness component as well can be really good at just sort of bringing you back to center. And I know, Claire, you also love getting out at the start and at the end of the day. Obviously, that's got lots of other great effects as well on your brain. But key, I think, really is just get what you can done where you can. Usually being more physically active is better. So more is usually better than less. But I aim to try and do things in the morning so I feel good, and I find that I'm more likely to be active later in the day.
Yeah, that's great advice. And yeah, I agree with all of that. I find that if I do some exercise in the morning, I am also more likely to be active throughout the day. And if you tell yourself, oh, I'm going to do something when I'm done everything else that I need to get done, you often don't get to it. So I think if we can incorporate that exercise, especially if we can get it outside in fresh air and getting that beautiful early light on our bodies, is just so incredible. It sets you up to be more active later, but also just to have a better perspective, to have more energy overall, and even to sleep better that night. So it's win-win-win on that one. And we'll definitely have to catch up for some walks, because I'm definitely that friend who always wants to walk. I'm the one who's always suggesting it, and not everybody's too impressed with that. So we're very similar. So based on everything we talked about here, what is one simple shift or one doable shift that we can all do to support our little ones to get more exercise and movement in their day and develop in a way that nature just intended them to?
I think that's a wonderful question. And I think the most important thing for us to do is to really be mindful of what's happening in that moment. So I guess as parents, this means really observing what our kids are doing and tuning into their needs, rather than trying to fit them into our mold of what we would like to do in the then and there or that day or whatever. I think if you think big picture about their development, being really mindful in those little moments, if they're excited about going outside to see the leaves, make the most of that and go with it. Being flexible, I think, is really key as well. And when you're really observing and being really mindful, you get into that sort of nice flow state really easily, and you're able to be more flexible to go with whatever it is. So I think in those pockets of time that you have, try and be really there and really present so that you can be responsive in appropriate ways for yourself, but also for your kids, so that, you can see if they need to jump on the bed before they finish, while they're listening to the story. Or you notice if they need to do whatever it is. Like if they need a cuddle and you're going to do your squats holding them today, then, that's the way it's going to go. So, yeah, I think that's sort of the really key thing of being right there with them, so that you can be as responsive as possible and go with and get the most out of the moments that you've got. I think for a lot of parents who are working, we talk a lot about mum guilt. I think it's then sometimes hard to be really there in those moments. Like it almost sometimes makes it harder. You sort of got almost like a pressure, like a monkey on your back of, you haven't been there for all this stuff. So I think those moments, wherever you can manage, be that 5 minutes, after dinner, that sort of in between the, dinner and bath, or bath and bed, or in the mornings, the 5 minutes before you go to work, whatever it is, wherever it is, those moments can be so precious when you're just really tuned in to where they're at. And I think just really taking your feedback from the kids is so key. If they need to be silly, if they need to have a bit of rough and tumble play, encouraging that introspection in them, I think, is really valuable as well. And then they'll start telling you. I keep getting requests at the moment, I need a wrestle. Okay. Yeah, I think that's probably the most important thing for parents to hold on to. There's obviously a lot of noise out there, and I feel like I've probably contributed to that today. But there is just so much that they are doing all the time, and really celebrating, all of that, whether it's a first jump or a hop, or just that they wanted to do a workout with you, or I think there's just so much there.
Yeah, that's beautiful. There's something that I often work with clients on, is getting them to have certain times throughout their day that they spend a dedicated, it could be 5 minutes, it could be 20 minutes, it's whatever they think is feasible, to just be really present with their kid and allow their kid to lead the play. And often it is rough and tumble or pretty physical, but sometimes it ends up being reading books or crafts or whatever it is that the child wants to do. But just spending that time and allowing it to be really focused on just being with them, like you're saying. And if my clients find it really useful to have it just once or twice a day, that you have it built into your routine. So it's not yet another thing that you have to get to at the end of the day. You just know that between when you wake up and you have breakfast, you have those 5 minutes, or whenever it fits in for you and your child. Maybe it's when they wake up from their nap. And it just seems to be such a useful thing for them to do, to connect. But then here, it also is really helping to support them in that exercise and enjoying what they're doing when it comes to physical movement. So I love that you suggested that.
Yeah,
So,
I think it's great.
Do you have any final words of wisdom for us? Anything that I didn't ask you that you really wanted to talk about?
I think the really key thing for all of us in messaging the sort of ideal lifestyle that we would love our kids to have, like obviously we would love them to eat a rainbow of vegetables, and exercise enough, or be physically active in their life. And, it has a whole host of benefits leading to hopefully a great life for them. I think the key always is going with, a path that is surrounded by things that they love. So, if they particularly love doing one sort of thing, then hold on to that and foster that, whether it's like they love music or they love books. Like, I think those things are all really to be celebrated. And I think we also need to honor that in ourselves as well, and to share that with them, that, you're really passionate about whatever it might be. Claire, I'm sure your boys could tell you that you love getting out into the beach in the mornings, and why you love being in the sunlight so early, and they're tiny. Like, isn't that just such a beautiful message that you've already given them? I think finding the stuff that really lights you up and sharing that with them is really important. And, obviously I'm an exercise lover, so that comes really easily to me around physical activity. But I think just reflecting on how things really truly make you feel is so important for our kids. Often, we are social creatures, so doing things with other people is important. And whatever it is that, you particularly enjoy about different things, try and sort of draw those tenets out of it to help your little people, and to get them to realize as well. And, sometimes it's subconscious at first, but then with reflection and practicing reflection, they can then start to realize the things that really make them feel good too. And I think as well, like in a really big sort of safety picture, that's so important for our kids too.
Yeah, that self-awareness is such an important skill across all aspects of our lives and their lives, isn't it? So if we can help facilitate that, that's incredible.
Yeah, I think so.
So before we let you go, can you tell us a little bit about where we can find out more about what you're doing? Are you on social media? Where can we see these videos of you? doing exercise with your little boy?
Thanks for asking. My business is called Medicize. So this sort of idea that exercise is medicine. And I'm on Instagram at Medicize HQ. So MEDICISE HQ. I'm on Facebook and LinkedIn, and you can find me everywhere. My YouTube page is in development. I think I need to put some time aside to make some more videos, but maybe I'll recruit some participants. Claire, look out. Maybe we'll get active together. Yeah, but I try and post quite frequently on Instagram, and I share a lot of other resources from other pediatric allied health, be them physios or OTs, psychs, speechies, lots of different people, because there are just so many components that come together for our little ones.
That's great. I'll put all that in the show notes, and we'll get your YouTube in there too. So that'll give you some motivation to get it up and going.
Perfect. Thanks for keeping me accountable.
Well, thank you so much for coming on here. You shared so much, and that's incredible, really valuable information, and lots of very tangible, doable things for parents. So thank you very much.
Total pleasure. Thanks for making this platform available and for having me on.